Hi everyone, welcome back. Dinosaurs! I freaking love dinosaurs! I have probably watched every dinosaur documentary ever. And yes, Jurassic Park is my favorite dinosaur movie, and I know for a fact that I have a shirt of Jurassic Park and I don't know where it is. And I'm very upset that I don't know where my Jurassic Park shirt is. Yes, The Land Before Time was a massive part of my childhood. Yes, I keep up with all things dinosaur news. I have news alerts on all things dinosaurs. Yes, I was ecstatic when I heard the nature narrator king, that is David Attenborough, was going to do a dinosaurs nature documentary series. If you don't know it, it's called Prehistoric Planet. There are 2 seasons. It always came out on my birthday week. You have no idea how happy I was when I heard that. Yes, History Channel's Jurassic Fight Club was my favorite TV show on that channel, right next to the universe. Yes, I am a nerd. And National Geographic's Sea Monsters, loved that. Made me fall in love with all things dinosaurs in the ocean. And I also, doing the research for this, I forgot that they made a Wii game. It was really cool, but I couldn't figure it out. My skills for Wii games never went above the Wii Sports, and I was killer at bowling. And yes, Disney's Dinosaur is the best little known Disney film ever. And yes, with all this obsession, really got me into thinking about being a paleontologist as a kid. But also, but that dream was short-lived. Anyway, I'm a very dinosaur nerdy person, and I am not ashamed of it. Anyone that is mildly into dinosaurs knows that the bones are called fossils, and they come from being embedded into the earth, and millions of years of soil and dirt has accumulated on top, and you have to dig and get to them. And there have been countless massive discoveries throughout centuries in fossil digging. But there is a little known woman that made a couple of massive and very significant dinosaur discoveries that changed the paleontology and dinosaur world and basically kicked off the theory that dinosaurs came before humans. That paleontologist is Mary Anning. Let's get started. Mary Anning was born on May 21st, 1799 in Lyme Regis, a small town in Dorset, England. Her father was Richard Anning, who was a carpenter and cabinet maker, and had a side job mining the coastal cliffside fossil beds near their town. And with the fossils he found, he would sell them to tourists. Her mother was named Mary Moore, also known as Molly. Molly and Richard had a total of 10 children. The first was a daughter born in 1794, also named Mary, followed by another daughter. The first son was born in 1796, named Joseph. After him came another son born in 1798, who unfortunately died in infancy. Then in December of that same year, the first Mary died after her clothes caught fire. Possibly when adding wood shavings to a fire, she was just 4 years old. Her death was even reported in the local newspaper. 5 months later, Mary II was born, and she was named Mary in tribute to her older sister, Mary. Unfortunately, the next 5 children didn't survive for more than a year or 2. Even more tragically, Mary and her older brother Joseph were the only children that survived into adulthood. Unfortunately, the rate of deaths in Mary's family wasn't uncommon in that era. During the 19th century, almost half of the children born in the UK died before the age of 5, and mainly died from diseases like smallpox and measles. When Mary was 15 months old, she was part of an event that became part of local lore. According to the lore, and this is insane, on August 19th, 1800, Mary was being held by Elizabeth Haskins, who was a neighbor of her family. She was standing under an elm tree with 2 other women watching a traveling troupe of horse riders, when suddenly lightning struck the tree. Mary, being held by Elizabeth, and the 2 other women were under. The lightning strike killed all 3 of the women and knocked little Mary basically unconscious. Onlookers rushed over and revived Mary in a hot water bath. A local doctor called Mary surviving a lightning strike that killed the women that was around her, including the one that held her, miraculous. I would call it being overseen by angels, but that's just me. Even more crazy, her parents said that before this, Mary was a very sickly baby, but after this, she blossomed. Years later, as she grew up, the townsfolk attributed her intelligence, curiosity, and lively personality to the lightning strike. Though Mary was very intelligent, her education was extremely limited. However, she was able to attend a Congregationalist Sunday school. That's a really weird word. Where she learned to read and write. Congregationalism is a Protestant, Reformed, or Calvinist tradition where churches practice congregational government, which is a form of church government. The Congregationalist doctrine, unlike the Church of England at the time, emphasized the importance of education for the poor. Due to her education at this church, Mary's most prized possession was a bound volume of the Dissenters, Theology Magazine and Review. Dissenters, or in this case, English dissenters, were Protestants who separated from the Church of England in the 17th and 18th centuries. And those people are ones who disagreed in opinions, beliefs, stuff like that. In this magazine, book, I think it's a magazine, her family's pastor, Reverend James Weation, I looked his last name up. That was what it said. And if I mispronounced it, I apologize. Published 2 essays. In one, he insisted that God had created the world in 6 days, and in the other, he urged dissenters to study the new science of geology. Her father, Richard, often took Mary and her brother Joseph fossil hunting. Best dad ever. Because like I said, their father would sell the fossils he found to get more income. Now, where their home was on the coast of the Blue Lias, which is a formation that runs along the east, west, and southern parts of England and parts of South Wales that make up the Lias group. The layers of limestone and shale, which is a mud mixture of clay and other minerals, date all the way back to 195 to 200 million years ago, which is the late Triassic and Jurassic periods. I'm getting psyched. What the Blue Lias is famous for are fossils, mainly ammonites. And to this day, it is one of Britain's richest fossil locations. Due to its high volume of these fossils, by the late 18th century, Lyme Regis had become a very popular seaside resort, especially after 1792, when the French Revolutionary Wars began. Many middle-class and wealthy people moved to England to get away from that insanity of the Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. And if you remembered the last video, there was kind of a weird trend going on in France, so I would leave too. Now, Mary's father wasn't the only one who sold fossils to tourists to supplement their income. Many of the locals sold fossils in order to supplement their income. Or, as the townsfolk called these tourists, curios. Think Cheerios, but take out the cheer. It's curios. Slang for curious? I have no idea. In fact, they gave many of the fossils unique names. Belemnites, which was a squid-like thing that lived from the late Triassic to late Cretaceous period, called them devil's fingers. Ammonites were called snake stones. And my personal favorite, they called the bone vertebrae of neck bones vertebraries. I love the creativity. These were sometimes attributed to having medical and mystical properties. In the early days of fossil hunting in the late 18th and early 19th century, it was considered a pastime. But of course, over time, it has become a very important science to geology and biology. Now, Mary's family was not rich, and with all these middle class and wealthy people coming in, food shortages were rampant. The price of wheat almost tripled, but working wages barely changed. Wanna know what that feels like? The prices of bread got so bad that Mary's dad got mad enough that he helped organize a protest against the shortages. Due to injuries he suffered from a fall from the very treacherous cliffs fossil hunting and contracting tuberculosis, Richard died in November of 1810 at the age of only 44, and Mary was only 11, leaving his family with no savings and a good amount of debt. Because of this, the family had to apply for poor relief and early form of government assistance. They continued to collect and sell fossils and set up a table next to a coach shop at the local inn. Mary, who was 12 at this time, and her brother Joseph made their first well-known discovery in 1811. They found a 4-foot Ichthyosaur skull after months of painstakingly, and if you've ever seen paleontologists uncover bones, you know it's a lot of work uncovering the bones, and Mary went on to uncover the rest of the skeleton herself. By the time she uncovered the skeleton, it was 15 feet long and was the most complete Ichthyosaur skeleton found yet. Ichthyosauria, also known as Ichthyosaurus, was a giant dolphin-like marine reptile that lived during the Mosaic era and died out in the late Cretaceous. It varied from 3 to 85 feet long, and if you've ever seen this photo by Edward Rieu, who illustrated 6 novels by Julius Verne, who wrote the books Journey to the Center of the Earth and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, this freaky looking thing is an ichthyosaur, and that, of course, is Nessie. A little while after the discovery, a lord of a manor near Lyme Regis named Henry Hoste Henley bought the piece for £23, or about £2,328 today. He then sold that to William Bullock, who was a well-known collector, and displayed it in London. While on display, it got a lot of attention and interest, mainly because a new kind of public awareness of the age of the Earth from the many prehistoric creature discoveries was growing. The fossil was later sold at an auction in May of 1819 as a crocodile in a fossil state for £25 and 5 shillings, or about $4,949, to Charles Connick, who was keeper of the Department of Natural History in the British Museum. Now, though it was titled as a crocodile, Charles had already suggested a name for it, Ichthyosaurus. Sir Everard Home of the Royal Society of London published a paper on the creature. It was about a 20-page paper called Some Account of the Fossil Remains of an Animal More Nearly Allied to Fishes Than Any of the Other Classes of Animals. In this paper, he drew one of the first ever scientific descriptions of it, and may I say, it is very detailed. I mean, the definition and the shading is insane. Now, here's a crazy, we're in this timeline. When this paper was published, it was very confusing. Why? Well, that's because his paper on a dinosaur was 45 years before Charles Darwin published his paper on the theory of evolution, and poor scientists had zero clue how this thing fit into everything else. And mind you, this is a time when the theory of science had a feeling of, okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down. Because remember, at this time, all that they had to go off of was the thing called the Bible. And dinosaurs didn't quite fit into that. After her husband's death, Mary's mother, Molly, took over and ran the fossil business. It is thought that that's all she did because she wasn't as much into fossil hunting as her children were. In late 1821, Molly wrote to the British Museum to ask for payment for the Ichthyosaur skeleton because, her daughter kind of found it. During this time, Joseph spent more and more time at his apprenticeship to an upholster, but was still active in the fossil business till 1825. At that time, Mary had reached the age of 26, and she then took over the family business. Now, remember the letter Molly sent to the museum saying, "Hey, can we get compensated for finding this thing?" Well, Long story, kind of shortened. In 1820, a common customer and buyer of the family, wealthy collector Lieutenant Colonel Thomas James Birch, became disturbed by the family's poverty. They had made no major discoveries in a year and were having to sell their furniture to make rent. So Birch decided to sell the fossils he bought from them and give the money to them. He wrote a letter to this guy, Gideon Mantell, a paleontologist. In this letter, Birch said that the funds would go to Molly and her poor family, and added that all of his really cool fossil things had come from them. At the auction held in London, he raised £400, or about £48,450 today. Now, how much of that was given to the Annings is not known, but it is said to have lessened the family's financial burdens. Plus, buyers coming from Paris and Vienna also helped raise the family's profile in the geological community. Mary continued to support herself selling fossils, and primarily what she sold was ammonite and belemnite shells, which were very common in the area, as well as, when she found them, Ichthyosaur vertebrate fossils. She would sell them for more because they were rarer. Many of her Ichthyosaur discoveries were sold to prominent naturalists and in turn were in leading scientific papers. Plus, with her plethora of fossils, she studied them like crazy, the fossil's anatomy, reading publications, and began to learn the new science of paleontology. I freaked the hell out when I found this out. Like I said, Mary kept on fossil hunting, and she did not stop because it was winter. In England, on the coast, uncovering fossils, on these cliffs, in 1820s winter clothes. But thank God she did. On December 10th, 1823, she made another massive discovery in the Cinemerian or early Jurassic Age rocks. She found the first ever, almost complete, plesiosaur skeleton. I love this dinosaur. Dinosaurs. This large marine reptile lived during the early Jurassic period, or about 201 million years ago. It is known for its long head and neck, which is why I love it. I don't know why, but I have a really weird fetish for long-necked dinosaurs. Land, sea, doesn't freaking matter. And if you've seen Prehistoric Planets season 2, there are these long-necked dinos that have like bubbles that come out of their necks. That's weirdly cool. This creature grew anywhere from 9.4 to 11.5 inches in length. The neck largely makes up for the length. There are about 40 neck vertebrae in this thing. And I say about because depending on the length, there could be 38 to 42 neck vertebrae. Now, the first thing I know for a fact that you first thought of when you saw this thing was the Loch Ness Monster, and you are correct. A plesiosaurus is the creature that people have said looks very close to the legendary monster. Now, I have been to the loch, and when I say that is the most magical, mystical thing on earth, I mean it. And you just look at the water alone, there's some kind of an energy that comes out of that thing. And quite frankly, I don't care if scientists say that there's no way a Loch Ness monster type looking thing lives in there. The loch is awesome and Nessie is real. You will never be able to not tell me not to believe that. And before we move on, I found this absolutely fascinating. Plesiosaurus was one of the first antediluvian reptiles to be found. Antediluvian, also called the pre-flood period, is the part in the Bible between the fall of man and the Great Flood. Which, by the way, did any of you see the Fantasia 2000 rendition of it with Donald Duck? freaking love that rendition of it. And I do love the scene when the mystical creatures are laughing at the pairs of mammals going into the boat. Anyway, the reason why this finding was so huge was that it was found when early scientists were trying to reconstruct the history of the Earth, aka the 6 days of creation. So this finding made them go, wait a minute. Also, a plesiosaur is one of the thousands of creatures thought to be the biblical creature, Leviathan. Did I go off the rails a little bit there? Totally. Do I care? Absolutely not. Though Mary had a limited education, she read as much scientific literature as she could find. And from this, on May 26, 1823, Mary wrote a letter talking about her plesiosaurus discovery, and in it, she did a sketch. If there is one thing you should know about fossils and dinosaur bones, is that it is stupid rare to find an almost complete skeleton of any kind of dino. And if I may, this skeleton shows a full-blown skeleton of a plesiosaurus. Sure, a toe or 8 are missing, but that is a complete skeleton. Now, I point this out because, as you can see, it is so insanely perfect that leading naturalist Charles Cuvier, to his credit, thought it was fake and insisted on examining it personally. When he did examine it, he was convinced that it was real. This discovery, of course, made Mary massively famous, and people would go to Lyme Regis just to meet her. But even with her fame, she was still left out of many scientific publications in which her fossils were talked about. From her first discovery of a plesiosaur, she then found a second one, and this one was also nearly complete, plus more plesiosaur specimens, some that are on display at the Natural History Museum in London to this day. Like, she just kept on finding all the full skeletons. It's nuts. Mary is also responsible for interpreting fossil poop. Hold on. She would normally find lumpy things in the gut of Ichthyosaurus, and when she broke them open, she found fish bones and scales. Now, remember William Bullock? He bought the first Ichthyosaurus from the lieutenant dude after he bought it from Mary. Well, after he bought that, he would frequent Lyme Regis and Mary on his Christmas vacations from teaching at Oxford, and was seen accompanying her fossil hunting. She told him about the poop fossils, and he used her observations to conclude that these were in fact fossilized poop, and coined the word coprolites, meaning fossilized feces. Who would have freaking known? William even credited and spoke highly of Mary in his paper about the coprolites, calling her Miss Mary Anning. Now, she's making all these awesome, massive, important discoveries in paleontology, right? But as a woman, she was treated as an outsider. At this time in Britain, women were not allowed to hold public office, vote, or even go to university. Even the newly established and more influential Geological Society of London didn't allow women to not only become members, but to even go to meetings as guests. The only jobs women could have in the workforce was as a domestic server, a worker in new factories, or as farm laborers. Even though Mary knew a ton of a lot more about fossils and geology than many of the wealthy male fossilists that she would sell to, want to make that perfectly clear, it was still male dominated. They would talk about her findings in their papers and never mentioned her name. And like any normal person, she was infuriated. A friend that would come with Mary to fossil hunt, Anna Pinney, wrote in a letter, quote, "She says the world has used her ill. These men of learning have sucked her brains and made a great deal of publishing works of which she furnished the contents, while she derived none of the advantages." End quote. Mary herself expressed her frustrations in a letter, quote, "The world has used me so unkindly. I fear it has made me suspicious of everyone." End quote. In 1926, she managed to save enough money and buy a home with a glass storefront and opened her own fossil shop called Anning's Fossil Depot. She had become so well known that famous and very important people visited her and her shop, including geologists with the most cool looking last name, but with the most boring pronunciation, George William Fenshaw. Disappointing. He called Mary a, quote, very clever, funny creature, end quote. Okay. And in 1844, King Frederick Augustus II of Saxony, part of the then Holy Roman Empire, visited Mary's shop and bought an Ichthyosaur skeleton for his massive natural history collection. She made another big discovery in 1829 when she uncovered a jumble of bones of a headless creature. She knew this was very different from the other fossils she found, so she showed them to William and he knew them immediately. Mary had just uncovered the first pterosaur outside of Germany. Pterosaurs are a group of flying dinosaurs that thrived from the late Triassic to the end of the Cretaceous, or 228 to 66 million years ago. Despite all her success, Mary still faced financial difficulties. By 1830, in combination with the current economics in Britain that decreased the demands for fossils and major gaps between finds, money was tight. But luckily, her friend and fellow geologist Henry de la Beach helped her by commissioning watercolor painter George Scharf the famous lithographic painting Doria Antiquae, or A More Ancient Dorset, that Henry illustrated based on Mary's notes, wanting to recreate the prehistoric life. It is called A More Ancient Dorset because the fossils that Mary had found that are in the illustration are found on the Dorset coast in Lyme Regis. The sales of the print did help Mary out, but she finally got a break in December of 1830 when she made another major find of another plesiosaur skeleton. This was a new type of plesiosaur which sold for 200 pounds or 28,630 pounds today. His purchase eventually got to the Natural History Museum in London, where it is still on display today. Her finances took another massive hit in 1835 when she lost most of her life savings in a bad investment. We don't know exactly what went wrong. Some say she invested with a con man that ran off with her money, or this con man dude suddenly died, so Mary had no way of recovering her money. Either way, her life savings totaled to 300 pounds or $48,000 today. Concerned again, William helped her again by convincing the British Association for the Advancement of Science and the British government to give her basically a stipend for her many contributions to the science of geology. It wasn't big money, 25 pounds or about $4,000 today, but it did give her some financial breathing room. Though Mary never married, probably because she was a bit of a dinosaur nerd, she had many, many friends. She would often go fossil hunting and corresponded with other women in the geological and scientific world and bonded over not only their love of science, but in how they were ignored by professionals in their field. By 1845, Mary developed breast cancer and the Geological Society paid for her treatments. She continued to work during her treatments, but as she got sicker, she had to stop her love of fossil hunting. Mary Anning died on March 9th, 1846 from breast cancer at the age of 47. She was buried on March 15th at the Lyme Regis Parish Church, and members of the Geological Society contributed a stained glass window in Mary's honor and memory that was unveiled in 1850. The stained glass shows the 6 corporal acts of mercy: feeding the hungry, giving water to the thirsty, clothing to the naked, sheltering the homeless, visiting prisoners and the sick. The inscription reads, quote, "This window is sacred to the memory of Mary Anning of this parish, who died 9 March AD 1847, and is erected by the Vicar and some members of the Geological Society of London in commemoration of her usefulness in furthering the science of geology, as also of her benevolence of heart and integrity of life." end quote. Mary's legacy is obvious, but her recognition was a long time coming. Mary's discoveries became key evidence for extinction. See, till the 1820s, scientists still believed that since new species didn't just appear, then there must not be extinct ones, because God created everything and it was perfect. So when Mary found the, dinosaur bones, that idea kind of started to get questioned. It showed that different creatures clearly walked on Earth before man, or as George here suggested, that due to these fossils, there had to have been an age of reptiles that had to have been the dominant life force before man and mammals. We now know this period as the Mosaic era that lasted from 252 to 66 million years ago, and this era happened at the same time as the Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. So when I say she started the, I guess you're gonna call it dinosaur theory, I literally mean that. You might know this tongue twister, and if I say this in one take, I am very proud of myself. She sells seashells on the seashore. The shells she sells are seashells, I'm sure. So if she sells seashells on the seashore, then I'm sure she sells seashore shells. First take, let's freaking go. Some believe Mary was the basis of Terry Sullivan's 1908 song, She Sells Seashells. Ugh. That made me tired. 163 years after her death in 2010, the Royal Society included Mary in a list of 10 British women who had most influenced the history of science. In 1902, a relative of one of Mary's fossil hunting friends, who would later go on to become well known in the fossil hunting world, Elizabeth Philpid, her nephew Thomas Philpid, built the Lyme Regis Museum on the very site Mary's former house stood. That is a few yards away from where Mary collected fossils. That is now part of the, and I love this freaking title, Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site. In 2021, the Royal Mint did a series of 50-pence coins called the Mary Anning Collection in acknowledgement of her lack of recognition as one of Britain's greatest fossil hunters, and her discoveries were often overlooked at the time when the scientific world was dominated by men and touted her as a working-class woman. The coins had pictures of her discoveries: the Temodontosaurus, plesiosaur, and Dimorphodon, which later turned out to be that bird she discovered in 1829. And in March of this year, 2024, the Royal Mail did a set of 4 stamps celebrating Mary and her discoveries. This is adorable, and I just had to include it. In 2018, an 11-year-old schoolgirl from Dorset, Evie Swire, formed a campaign to remember Mary in her hometown of Lyme Regis by erecting a statue and creating a learning legacy in her name. It was called Mary Ann Rocks, and this is adorable. And on May 21st, 2022, on the 223rd anniversary of Mary's birth, Evie's campaign led to a statue being erected on a space overlooking Black Ven, where Mary made many of her findings. In Lyme Regis, on a typical summer's day, many still visit and collect specimens on the same beaches, now lined with ammonite-themed streetlights. Oh my god, I love that. Where Mary searched and discovered many groundbreaking prehistoric fossils over 200 years ago. Dinosaurs! There you go. The woman that discovered the first fully intact-ish plesiosaur and ichthyosaur skeleton in history of everything. When I found that she was an unknown powerhouse in the dinosaur paleontology world, I freaked out. And then when I found out that she had discovered my all-time favorite dinosaur ever, I doubly freaked out and went, I'm gonna talk about her. Now, did I go off the rails a little bit with my dino talk? Possibly. Do I care? Absolutely do not care, because dinosaurs are freaking awesome. And I hope you learned something today. I know I did on a lot of this stuff, and a lot of the stuff I already kind of knew because, again, I'm a dinosaur nerd. But if you learned something today, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while down there, please leave a friendly comment and comment your favorite dinosaur, because I have to ask that question. I must know because dinosaurs are cool. I'll see you in my next video. But until then, don't be well behaved. You just might make herstory. See you next time, guys. I'm gonna go watch Prehistoric Planet now.